What's up, squad? This is Brandon from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, it looks like the world is unraveling. I wanted to touch base on some hot topics that's going around, and it seems to be compounding to an unnecessary degree. We already had the issues occurring with the tragedies occurring in Gaza between the Palestinians and Israelis, as well as the Russian-Ukraine war. And it's some conflicts that's already going that are being exacerbated, but it seems as though it's some old, dormant, um, antagonistic relationships that are also being brought to the surface in this very, very hot political climate. And we can start off with the U.S. domestically and internationally. The racial tension has been heating up a lot with story after story, just as enraging as they are tragic between black and white relations within the United States. And of course, everybody wants justice to prevail, but it's really presenting a very, very uh, controversial conflict in the United States. And this can be around a lot of things. And I really think it boils down to the current economic environment, coupled that with basically a new world order. Things are changing. The West isn't as head and shoulders amongst the rest of the world as it used to be. And what comes to that is there's going to be growing pains as there is a new world order and there's a more even distribution of economic performance. And it's not to say that it hasn't always been uh, racial tension in the United States. That's always been the case. It's within the roots of the nation itself. It's when it's, I don't want to say exploited, but it's being exacerbated. It's being brought to the surface, churned up to an unnecessary degree in this trying time. And I think couple that tension or that media coverage with the economic realities that Americans are blatantly dealing with. They want to know where is all of the wealth that they have created and why their lives doesn't seem to be as beneficial as their grandparents or great grandparents. And when politicians don't have the answers, which they usually don't, they point fingers, and that's a very unfortunate stage of event. But this is the child, you can say, as I always say, your leadership validates your culture. These are the children that America gave birth to. So with Trump, despite all of the intense rhetoric, Hispanics are still here. Latinos are still here. The people from the developing world, or third world, for lack of a better phrase, and they're still here. And they're still working jobs in America. People income has not drastically increased. High cost of living has not waned. It's still difficult to get into your first home. Manufacturing is still run out of Asia. And these were not the promises that were told, but for those that know that the promises were that of a person looking to get elected. And of course, it's not to say that he's not trying his best efforts to accomplish these things, but it is saying that there's a macro environment that isn't as yielding to American interests as it once was. And there's some resentment and misplaced frustration on that. And who knows how that's going to play out. But what we do hope is that justice prevail and there is peace, as much peace as can be given to all the people involved in these horrifically tragic incidents that have been occurring, that have been brought to light. You couple that domestic tension with America's tension within Latin America. America has been a little bit more aggressive, especially when it comes to countries such as Venezuela. America's already taken a fight, naming numerous Latin, you can say, organized crime organizations as terrorist organizations, and they're taking a particular interest in Venezuela, whether that's messing with their licenses around oil with Chevron, whether that's putting pressure on the Maduro government They've out of all the gangs that I saw on a terrorist watch list, there was only one country outside of Mexico, and that was Venezuela. Uh, you have the situation where there was just an evacuation from the Argentinian embassy of opposition leaders. Usually, when you see that, and those opposition leaders, Venezuelan opposition leaders, were brought to the United States. And usually, when you see something like that, countries harbor these leaders, or have I seen it in history? It's a similar situation where you can see what happened with Khomeini in Iran, or a similar situation which you saw with Vladimir Lenin when the fall of Imperial Russia. Countries, when these countries face turmoils, the outside countries will usher in opposition leaders to gain hold of the reins. It's kind of a way of indirectly putting yourself at the top of the leader. You can see the same situation that just happened in Syria. The current opposition that rules Syria, HTS, they were supported heavily by Turkey. And now look, who's really calling the shots in Syria? A lot of people argue Syria is a sovereign nation, but Turkey has great influence within inside it. And to see opposition leaders from Venezuela wind up in the United States, I find that to be a very, very interesting move on a chessboard. Going across the world, Sudan just cut ties with UAE. The Sudanese government, General Burhan, had just cut ties with UAE. Now, for those that know, Sudan has been in a civil strife primarily caused by the RSF, who at one time was in cahoots with the government, with dealing with, you could say, the western part of the country, as well as some of the strife in the southern part before the partition of South Sudan. So these are two, what one would call two Arab forces going at each other in Sudan. And it was suspicions from the stories I read before, where you had one side, the government being backed by Saudi Arabia, and the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, working out of Western Sudan, being backed by UAE. And I think that's just been validated with the Sudan government saying how they're going to cut ties with the UAE. Obviously, with Sudan was on a retreat, the Sudanese government was on a retreat, and they settled into Port Sudan, which was closer to Saudi Arabia, further cementing the fact that they felt very close in their alliance and being under the umbrella of Saudi Arabia. Further bringing this leaves two questions, right? One is why the country is going through the civil war. From what I understand, Rapid Support Forces can never gain consensus in Khartoum. They can never govern the country in its entirety. They're a border group between Sudan and Chad, and they're kind of seen as on the wings of Sudan and then infringed on that western section. And they kind of have some freedom to operate there and then carry out some nefarious mineral deals because of the situation, the political situation. And it seems as though they're really biting off, they want a bigger slice of the pie, which caused them to drive all the way to Khartoum and forcing the government to go to the port of Sudan on the coast closer to Saudi Arabia. But the second bigger question, because now the Sudanese government has started to counterattack and they're pushing their way back to Khartoum. But the real question I would ask is, okay, let's say that Saudi Arabia is back in the government of Sudan and the UAE are back in the RSF. The real question is, what is this contention between Saudi Arabia and UAE? Why are these two good Arab Islamic nations at each other's throat in an indirect way? And what further ramifications could that bring? What is this conflict that's brewing below the surface? Of course, Qatar has always kind of been a little bit on the outs. They've had some issues with their, whether the news media, Saudi Arabia put embargo on them. There has been issues with Qatar, but UAE and Saudi Arabia usually been more aligned. So to see this great contention, and maybe it's for leadership, who knows, but to see this great contention between Saudi Arabia and UAE, I find it to be very interesting, to the fact that it's a bloody war in Sudan, destroying the countries. And it seems as though these are the two sides that are making this happen. Of course, you have Houthis. Houthis are operating within Yemen, and they have in conflict, supposedly threatening to shut down the Red Sea. I think the Houthi situation is overblown. I just don't think. I think they're very controlled by somebody. The question is who. Yemen is one of the more poor nations in the world, and to give them credit for being able to shut down Mediterranean trade, I just don't do it at this stage of the game. India, Pakistan. This seems like something that's being forced, unfortunately, in my opinion. There was a tragic situation that occurred with the death of tourists, and it seems India is committed to escalating this conflict, and Pakistan is small but mighty. It's not small by absolute standards, only small in comparison to India, the most populous country in the world. And the reason why this is really escalating is because Pakistan has two great allies. Pakistan left alone, it suffers the most, right? But when someone sees India attacking Pakistan, these someone being Pakistan, one of their closest and oldest ally, China, which some consider to have given a nuclear bomb to Pakistan as a way of balancing power in Asia, as well as Pakistan and them going back and having great relationships. So China and Pakistan are great friends. I would put Pakistan as probably China's biggest ally for numerous reasons. And then you couple that with the fact that Turkey has already sent material support for Pakistan. So Turkey as well is seeing that they don't like the way. Turkey has already had a little skirmish with Indian forces in Armenia, a sort of prelude to this situation where India was trying to support Armenia in the Nagorno-Karabakh situation that happened in that Armenian region of Azerbaijan, which since it's concluded where Turkey and Azerbaijan came out on top. But Turkey has started sending material support. So what this means is that if you have material and moral support coming as far as Turkey to Pakistan, it's possible that any significant escalation on India's part, whereas Pakistan is seen to be the victim here, could really unify the Islamic world to a serious degree against Indian interest. So we do hope cooler heads prevail on that front as well. So these are just a few of the major hot spots that I'm seeing. And when I see things happen like this, to such a degree, to such a rapidity, I have to ask myself, is it coincidental? Maybe these were all latent issues that has come to bear. And maybe it's just that time that some of these issues need to be confronted because it's what this time demands. Nevertheless, you have a lot of players and a lot of lives at stake and a lot of tragedy in general that are going on in the world that one can only pray and hope to resolve in a beneficial way. I harken back. Civilization is a luxury. Being civilized is a luxury. Resource management is the name of the game, and this is why power is so important. Power decides who has access, who doesn't, who does not have access to the resources. And resource management has been the name of the game. And at the end of the day, countries want to provide for their people. And these are all the fact that we have diplomatic arenas to settle things in a peaceful way speaks volumes about the human desire for peace. But the fact that we constantly find ourselves in these dire straits also remind us greatly of human capacity for violence. So we all hope for the best. Prayers up. If you have any insight or if you feel a conflict that really should get some more light, we didn't even touch on what's going on in Congo and that situation. But if you wanted to add some areas of concern in the comments. Please do like, share, subscribe if you enjoy the content. Until next time, God bless. Bantu up.